The stillness of the lake had a kind of magic that no city noise could ever match. Mist rolled off the water in thin, ghostly streams as the first rays of sunlight stretched across the horizon, turning the surface of the lake into a sheet of molten gold. Birds called to each other in the trees, their songs blending with the distant rustle of leaves in the morning breeze. The air smelled of pine, damp earth, and wood smoke. James sat on the front porch of his cabin, coffee mug warming, his hands gazing at the beauty before him. His cabin wasn't flashy, just a sturdy log structure with a stone chimney, a wraparound porch, and a dock that jutted out into the lake. It wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was meant to last. It's the kind of place you could disappear into. When the world got too loud, this place had been in his family for generations. It wasn't a vacation home he'd rented or bought on a whim. It was land his grandfather had worked for, a place filled with memories. He could still picture himself as a boy running barefoot along the lakeshore, fishing with his father, learning how to chop wood in the yard. To James, this cabin wasn't just a house. It was the heart of who he was. He had taken the week off from work to come here, to unplug and recharge. No emails, no deadlines, no traffic. Just him, the lake, and the quiet hum of nature. But even as he sat there in peace, a part of him knew it couldn't last forever, and he was right. It started with the crunch of gravel under determined footsteps. At first he thought it might be one of the few locals who occasionally passed by, maybe to wave or say hello. But the rhythm of the steps told him otherwise. Fast, heavy, almost stomping. He looked up just in time to see her coming down the dirt path, a woman in her late 40s or early 50s. Her hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her expression into a permanent scowl. She wore a bright visor and HOA badge pinned to her shirt like it gave her actual authority, and carried a clipboard tucked under her arm. James had seen her type before. Every community had one. The self-appointed enforcer. The neighbor who thought rules mattered more than people. He'd heard rumors from locals about Karen, a woman who lived a few roads over and who made it her business to control everything. She could. From barking dogs to lawn decorations, she seemed to have declared war on joy itself. She spotted James and immediately quickened her pace, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" she barked, her voice slicing through the quiet morning like a chainsaw. "What do you think you're doing here?" James took another sip of his coffee, unbothered. "Enjoying my morning. Why do you ask?" She planted herself at the foot of his porch steps, arms crossed tightly across her chest. "Don't play dumb. You can't just sit around on this property like you own the place. This cabin has been empty for years. You're trespassing." James raised an eyebrow. He set his mug down on the arm of his chair and leaned forward slightly. "This cabin is mine. I'm not trespassing." Karen let out a sharp laugh, the kind that dripped with disbelief and superiority. "Yours? Oh, please. I've lived here for 10 years, and I know everyone in this neighborhood. You're not one of them. This lake is private property, members only. You can't just show up and claim a cabin." Her words didn't rattle him. If anything, they amused him. He'd spent his life dealing with people like her in one form or another. People who thought loud voices and empty threats gave them power. "I'm not claiming anything," he said evenly. "This land has been in my family for generations. I have as much right to be here as anyone." Karen's face flushed. "That's a lie. Don't you dare try to pull that on me. Do you even realize the rules we have? The HOA regulates who can live here, what colors homes can be painted, even what kind of fences are allowed. This cabin has been under our jurisdiction for years, and I've never approved anyone like you." The way she spat the word "you" hung heavy in the air. James caught it. He let it roll around in his mind, but didn't rise to it. Instead, he stayed calm, letting her dig her own hole. "Look," he said, his voice firm, but not unkind. "I don't need your approval to be here. I don't answer to the HOA. This is my land, my cabin. End of story." Karen's eyes widened, as if he'd just cursed at her. She jabbed a finger toward him. "Oh, I see how it is. You think you're above the rules? You think you can waltz in here, disrespect our community, and do whatever you want?" "Well, not on my watch. I'm calling the board." James shrugged. Call whoever you want. I'm not leaving. That response lit a fire under her. She pulled her phone from her pocket with a dramatic flare, as if dialing was the equivalent of pulling a weapon.
Fine.
You've left me no choice. I'm calling the police. We'll see how smug you are when you're dragged out of here in handcuffs. She punched the numbers furiously, pacing back and forth as she spoke into the phone. Her voice was loud enough that James and likely half the neighborhood could hear every word. Yes, hello. I need police at Lakeside Estates immediately. There's a trespasser refusing to leave private property. He's aggressive, and I feel unsafe. Please hurry. James shook his head slowly, picking his mug back up. Aggressive? Unsafe? The only thing he'd done was drink coffee and refuse to bow to her imagined authority. As she hung up, she turned back to him with a triumphant smirk. You've got 10 minutes before they arrive. I suggest you pack up your little things and get moving, because once the cops show up, you're finished. James leaned back in his chair, the very picture of composure. I'm not going anywhere. By now, the commotion had drawn attention. A few curious neighbors had wandered over, whispering to each other as they watched the confrontation unfold. Some of them looked uncomfortable, glancing from Karen, too. James and back again, as if unsure whose side to be on. Is that the old cabin? One man whispered. Yeah, but I thought it was abandoned. Karen says he's trespassing. He doesn't look like a trespasser. He looks settled. James noticed the crowd, but didn't mind. Let them watch. The truth would reveal itself soon enough, and when it did, Karen's little crusade would crumble faster than she could imagine. Karen, fueled by the audience, puffed herself up even more. Everyone here knows the rules, she declared loudly. We don't tolerate squatters. We don't tolerate strangers. This is a respectable neighborhood, and we will not let it be ruined. James rose to his feet then, slowly, deliberately.
I dare you.
At his full height, he towered over her, his calm demeanor only making him more imposing. He didn't raise his voice, didn't clench his fists, didn't show an ounce of aggression. He simply looked her in the eye and said, I've told you once, and I'll tell you again. This cabin is mine. This land is mine. And I am not leaving. The firmness in his tone was unshakable. For the first time, Karen's confidence wavered. She opened her mouth to snap back, but the distant sound of sirens cut through the tension. They were coming, and James knew this was the moment. Everything would change. The echo of sirens carried over the lake before the lights even appeared. The sound bounced between the trees, startling a few birds into flight. The crowd that had gathered near the cabin leaned forward with anticipation, their whispers rising into a nervous hum. Some looked worried. Some looked eager. But all of them were waiting for the spectacle they thought was about to unfold. Karen practically vibrated with self-satisfaction. Her arms were crossed tightly across her chest, her chin high, and her smirk wide. She glanced at the neighbors surrounding her, then back at James, who still stood tall on his porch like a man who hadn't a care in the world. You'll regret this, she hissed under her breath, loud enough for him to hear. You think, you can talk down to me? Wait until the police put you in cuffs? James simply sipped the last of his coffee, his calmness almost infuriating in contrast to her giddy anticipation. The truth, he knew, would land soon enough. Moments later, 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled up the dirt road, their red and blue lights casting streaks across the pines. Dust rose in their wake as the engines quieted. Da-da-da-da. One tall and broad-shouldered with mirrored sunglasses, the other younger, but equally alert. Both scanned the scene carefully, hands hovering near their belts. Eyes narrowing on James. Karen immediately launched into her performance. She darted toward them, her voice carrying like a megaphone. Officers, thank goodness you're here. That man is trespassing in our neighborhood. He's been aggressive, refused to leave, and he's making everyone feel unsafe. You have to get him out of here right now. Her words spilled out fast, laced with exaggeration. She gestured wildly toward James, who remained on the porch perfectly. Composed, the older officer raised a hand to quiet her. Ma'am, we'll handle this. Step aside. Karen huffed, but obeyed, folding her arms and hovering just close enough to hear every word. She couldn't wait for James to be dragged off her precious neighborhood's property. The officers approached the porch. Their posture, professional but cautious. "Sir," the older one said firmly, "we've received a complaint that you're trespassing on this property. We'll need to see some identification and, if you have it, proof of ownership." James nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting that exact request. "Of course, officer. I have everything you need right here." He turned, walked into the cabin, and returned moments later with a thick leather folder. He placed it gently on the porch railing, opening it to reveal neatly organized documents. First, he handed over his driver's license. The younger officer took it, verifying his name. Then James gestured toward the stack of papers. "These are the property deeds, signed and notarized by the county clerk. This cabin is mine." Karen let out a mocking laugh. "Fake papers. He probably printed them off the internet." The officers ignored her, flipping through the documents carefully. The older one frowned, scanning line after line. His eyes widened slightly, and his lips pressed into a thin line. He flipped to the next page, then the next, his movements growing slower. James spoke evenly. "That's not just the deed for this cabin. It's the deed for all the surrounding land, including the lakefront. The roads and everything you're standing on right now." The younger officer blinked, glancing at his partner in disbelief. "It says here he's right," the crowd murmured in shock. Heads turned, neighbors whispering nervously. One woman covered her mouth with her hand, while a man shook his head slowly. The older officer cleared his throat, looking up at James. "Sir, according to these records, you own this entire tract of land. The HOA properties included—" James gave a single nod. "That's correct. It was my grandfather's originally. It's passed down to me. I pay the taxes, I maintain the deeds, and I haven't once challenged the people who live here until today." Karen's smirk collapsed into wide-eyed panic. "That's ridiculous. He's lying." "You don't own this neighborhood, the HOA does. We've had rules here for years." James finally turned his gaze directly on her, calm but sharp. "You've had rules, right? Rules you invented, rules you enforced without any legal authority. But this land was never yours to govern. The HOA has been bluffing, and you've been bullying people into believing you had power." Her face turned crimson. She sputtered, words tangling together in desperation. No, I've been keeping order. This is a community without us. It would fall apart." The neighbors exchanged uneasy looks. For years, they had tolerated Karen's policing of their lawns, her endless fines, her constant complaints. Some had been afraid to speak out, others too exhausted to fight back. But now, with James standing steady and the police confirming his ownership, the cracks in her authority spread like wildfire. A man in the crowd muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "If he owns the land, then what the hell have we been paying HOA fees for?" The question rippled through the group, sparking murmurs of agreement. "Yeah," another neighbor said. "She'll fine me for parking my truck in front of my house," said she. "It was against regulations. She made me repaint my fence last summer," a woman added bitterly. "Cost me $2,000. Karen spun toward them, her hands flailing. "Don't listen to him. He's lying. Everything I've done has been to protect property values. You need me." But the tide had shifted. For the first time, the neighbors weren't nodding along. They weren't scared of her threats. They were questioning her, and the truth was unraveling faster than she could stitch it back together. The older officer snapped his folder shut, handing it back to James with a respectful nod. "Everything checks out. He's the legal owner." "Ma'am," he turned toward Karen, his tone firm. "You've made a false report. That's a serious offense." Karen froze, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. But I didn't know, I thought." Her voice wavered. "I thought he was trespassing." The officer shook his head. "It was your responsibility to confirm facts before calling 911. This could be classified as harassment. And if he chose to press charges, you'd be in even deeper trouble." James's eyes lingered on Karen. He could see the desperation in her face, the way her shoulders slumped as the reality of her situation sank in. But he wasn't interested in vengeance. "I'm not pressing charges," he said evenly. "Not today, but understand this, your authority here is gone. The HOA never had any power. From this moment forward, your rules, your fines, your intimidation, all ends." The neighbors let out a collective sigh, some murmuring in relief, others clapping softly. A weight seemed to lift from their shoulders, as if the chains of Karen's imagined rule had finally broken. Karen's eyes darted wildly between them, searching for support, but none came. Where once people had feared her, now they looked at her with disgust. Even pity. The younger officer stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Ma'am, we'll need to file an incident report, and if you continue this kind of behavior, it could escalate into charges. For now, I suggest you leave." Her face crumpled. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed back down the dirt path, her steps heavier than ever. The crowd parted as she passed, but no one offered her sympathy. Instead, whispers followed her like shadows. James tucked the folder back under his arm, his calm presence steady as ever. He looked out at the neighbors, many of whom now stared at him with a mixture of awe and respect. "I don't want trouble," he said. "I'm not here to take anything from you. I've let people live here because I respect the community my grandfather once dreamed of. But don't mistake kindness for weakness. This land is mine, and I won't tolerate anyone trying to bully me off it again." The neighbors nodded, murmuring their understanding. Some even stepped forward to shake his hand, offering quiet thanks. For the first time in years, the illusion of Karen's authority had shattered. In its place stood the quiet, unshakable truth of the man who owned it all. The officers, satisfied, returned to their cruisers, the flashing lights fading as they pulled away. The crowd slowly dispersed, conversations buzzing with disbelief and relief. James turned back to his porch, sat down, and poured himself another cup of coffee. The lake was calm again, but the balance of power around it had shifted forever. Karen didn't sleep that night. Her curtains stayed drawn, her lights flickered on and off, and her phone buzzed constantly. She'd tried to get ahead of the story by calling her inner circle, the people she'd bullied into loyalty with years of intimidation, but it didn't work. Every time she spoke, she was interrupted with the same quiet words. "Karen, he owns everything. We saw the papers. We saw the cops confirm it." By morning, the whole Lakeside neighborhood was humming. Rumors flew faster than truth. But one thing was certain. Karen's reign had cracked. Neighbors who once jumped to repaint their shutters or move their flower pots overnight now leaned back in their chairs. Sipping coffee and smiling like a heavy burden had finally been lifted. James woke at dawn, as he always did, the sunlight spilling across the calm waters of the lake. He walked the perimeter of his property, boots crunching softly on gravel, taking note of the cabins and homes built on what technically was still his land. He didn't harbor resentment. Let families stay here for years because he wanted them to enjoy the same beauty his grandfather once loved. But Karen had crossed the line. She had turned hospitality into hostility. And last night had proven her downfall wasn't just possible, was inevitable. By mid-morning, a knock rattled his cabin door. James opened it to find two neighbors, an elderly couple who had lived in the area for nearly 3 decades. They looked nervous, shuffling on their feet, but their eyes were kind. "Mr. Walker."
"Yeah?"
The old man said softly, "We just wanted to say thank you for what you did last night, for standing up to her. We thought she was untouchable." James shook his head. No one's untouchable, especially not someone who builds their power on fear. The woman nodded, her voice trembling. "She'll find us last year for having our grandkids' bikes left outside overnight, said it was an eyesore, cost us $200. We didn't fight it because, well, everyone knew what happened if you crossed her." James sighed. He'd suspected. Karen was petty, but hearing stories like this sharpened his resolve. It wasn't just about his cabin anymore. It was about the entire community she'd held under her thumb. Word spread that James was meeting with the sheriff's office that afternoon to review the HOA's so-called authority. By lunchtime, nearly half the neighborhood had shown up near the county courthouse to watch. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, as though the townsfolk were waiting for a trial. Inside, James sat across from the county clerk, a stack of files spread between them. Karen sat on the other side of the room, arms crossed, her jaw clenched tight. She had brought 2 of her HOA board members, though they looked less like supporters and more like hostages, well stagist and avoiding eye contact with her. The clerk adjusted his glasses, flipping through records. "Mr. Walker," he said, his voice even. "Your family has owned this land since 1919. Taxes have been paid consistently, deeds properly maintained. There is no record of any transfer of authority to the homeowners association." Karen leaned forward, nearly shouting. "But we've been running the neighborhood for years, collecting dues, maintaining order, enforcing standards." The clerk gave her a flat look. "Without legal standing, ma'am, that makes your actions void. At best, they're community agreements. At worst, they're fraud." The word hung heavy in the air. Fraud. A ripple of whispers spread through the room, neighbors exchanging shocked glances. Karen's face drained of color. "Fraud, no? I was preserving property values." Her voice cracked. "I wasn't. Stealing." But James's calm voice cut through her denial. "You find people without authority, collected money without rights. You harassed me on land my family has owned for over a century. If that's not theft, Karen, I don't know. What is—" The sheriff, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke up. "Mr. Walker, would you like to file charges?" The room fell silent. Every eye turned to James. Karen's breath caught audibly, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly. Her knuckles turned white. James studied her, his steady gaze unwavering. He saw not just her, but the years of fear she had inflicted on everyone around her. And yet, he also saw the desperation of a woman whose crumbling ego had left her hollow. "No," he said finally, his tone firm. "I won't press charges. I'm not interested in dragging this through the courts, but I will be making changes." Karen exhaled shakily, as if she'd narrowly escaped a noose. But James wasn't finished. He turned to the neighbors filling the room. "From this day forward, the HOA is dissolved. Any dues you've paid will be returned. I'll see to that myself. The land you've built your homes on will remain yours in practice, but understand, it's all under my stewardship. If you want to live here, you'll do so without harassment, without false rules, and without one person lording power over. The rest, this county has been in my family for generations. I'll honor that by making sure it never falls into the hands of people like her again." The room erupted in applause, the kind that starts tentative and then grows into thunder. Some people even stood, clapping with tears in their eyes. Years of frustration, of fear, of quiet submission had finally been released in one single moment. Karen bolted upright, her chair screeching against the floor. "This isn't over," she spat, though her voice cracked under the weight of her humiliation. She stormed out of the courthouse, the crowd parting in silence, their eyes hard with disapproval. For the first time, Karen walked away not as the queen of her imagined kingdom, but as a disgraced woman stripped of power. In the days that followed, the community transformed. Neighbors began talking openly, sharing stories of fines and threats they'd endured. They gathered at James's cabin one evening, bringing food, drinks, and even music. Laughter echoed across the lake for the first time in years, free of the constant shadow Karen had cast. James stood by the water's edge, watching kids chase fireflies and adults clink glasses in celebration. A few neighbors came up to him, thanking him again, but he waved it off. "This isn't about me. It's about all of you remembering this place isn't supposed to be a prison. It's supposed to be home." The sheriff stopped by that night, too, tipping his hat toward James. "You handled this better than most would have. Could have buried her in lawsuits, but you chose peace." James gave a small smile. Peace lasts longer than revenge. As the evening drew on, lanterns flickered over the water, and the stars reflected in the still surface of the lake.
Nice.
Finally sat back on his porch, watching the glow of happiness spread through a community that had been held down too long. And in that quiet, the sound of laughter and freedom ringing out, James knew one truth. Karen had called 911 thinking she'd summon his downfall. Instead, she'd exposed her own. Because while she thought she ruled a neighborhood, James had reminded everyone of the simple fact she had overlooked: he owned the county. And with that came not just power, but the responsibility to use it. With grace, it was the kind of ending you couldn't script better if you tried. The HOA was gone. Karen was finished. And the county finally belonged to its people again.